Hey everyone, for today's video we're counting down the top 15 strangest places where people have been stranded. Now these are tales of survival and isolation in the most unlikely locations, ranging from tiny uninhabited islands to distant space stations. So let's start with number 15, Alexander Selkirk, uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean. Alexander Selkirk was a Scottish privateer and a Royal Navy officer who spent 4 years and 4 months as a castaway from 1704 to 1709 after being marooned by his captain, initially at his request on an uninhabited island in the South Pacific. He did survive but died from tropical illnesses years later while serving as a lieutenant aboard the HMS Weymouth off West Africa. In September 1704, after parting ways with Dampier, Captain Stradling brought Cinque Ports to an island known to the Spanish as Masa Tierra, located in the uninhabited Juan Fernandez archipelago, 670 kilometers off the coast of Chile. He declared that he would rather stay on Juan Fernandez than continue in a dangerously leaky ship. Well, Stradling took him up on that offer and landed Selkirk on the island with a musket, a hatchet, a knife, a cooking pot, a Bible, bedding, and some clothes. Well, Selkirk immediately regretted his rashness, but Stradling refused to let him back. During his time, he ate spiny lobsters and scanned the ocean daily for rescue, suffering all the while from loneliness, misery, and remorse. Hordes of sea lions gathering on the beach for the mating season eventually drove him to the island's interior. Once inland, his way of life took a turn for the better. More foods were available there. Feral goats, introduced by earlier sailors, provided him with meat and milk, while wild turnips, the leaves, the indigenous cabbage tree, and dried Chinese fruits offered him a variety and spice. Well, rats would attack him at night, but he was able to sleep soundly and in safety by domesticating and living near feral cats. Selkirk's long-awaited deliverance came on February 2, 1709, by way of Duke, a privateering ship piloted by William Dampier, and its sailing companion, the Duchess. Thomas Dover led the landing party that met Selkirk, and after 4 years and 4 months without human company, Selkirk was almost incoherent with joy. The Duke's captain and leader of the expedition was Woodes Rogers, who wryly referred to Selkirk as the governor of the island. Well, this saved castaway caught 2 or 3 goats a day and helped restore the health of Rogers' men, who had developed scurvy. Number 14, Teruo Nakamura. Teruo Nakamura was a Taiwanese-Japanese soldier of the Imperial Japanese Army who fought for Japan in World War II and did not surrender until 1974. He was the last known Japanese holdout to surrender after the end of the hostilities in 1945. Nakamura was born October 8, 1919. And in November 1943 he enlisted in a volunteer unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. Nakamura was stationed on Morotai Island in the Dutch East Indies, shortly before the Allies overran that island in the September of 1944 Battle of Morotai. Now, allegedly, the Imperial Japanese Army declared Nakamura dead on November 13, 1944. After the Allies captured the island, it appears that Nakamura remained there with other stragglers well into the 1950s. In 1956, apparently, he relinquished his allegiance with his fellow holdouts and set off to construct a solitary camp consisting of a small hut in a fenced field. Nakamura's hut was accidentally discovered by a pilot in mid-1974. In November that year, the Japanese embassy in Jakarta requested assistance from the Indonesian government in organizing a search mission, which was conducted by the Indonesian Air Force on Morotai, leading to Nakamura's arrest by Indonesian soldiers on December 18, 1974. Nakamura decided to be repatriated straight to Taiwan, bypassing Japan. Upon his return, the Taiwanese press referred to him as Lee Kwang-hee, a name he learned of only after his repatriation. And initially, the Republic of China government on Taiwan didn't receive him well, seeing him as a Japanese loyalist. As a private in a colonial unit in foreign soil, Nakamura was not entitled to a pension, which caused a considerable outcry in the press, motivating the Republic of China and the public to donate to his pension. 5 years after his repatriation on June 15, 1979, Nakamura died of lung cancer. Number 13, Andes flight disaster. Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 was a chartered flight to Santiago, Chile that crashed in the Andes Mountains on October 13 of 1972. The accident and subsequent survival became known as the Andes flight disaster and the Miracle of the Andes. The flight was carrying 45 passengers and crew, including 19 members of the Old Christians Club rugby union team, along with their families, supporters, and friends. 3 crew members and 9 passengers died immediately, and several more died soon after due to the frigid temperatures and the severity of their injuries. The crash site was located at an elevation of 3,500 meters in the remote Andes Mountains of western Argentina, just east of the border with Chile. Search and rescue aircraft overflew the crash site several times during the following days, but failed to see the white fuselage against the snow. Search efforts were called off 8 days after searching, and during the 72 days following the crash, the survivors suffered from extreme hardships, including sub-zero temperatures, exposure, starvation, and an avalanche, which led to the death of 13 more passengers. The remaining passengers resorted to cannibalism to survive. Convinced they would die if they didn't seek help, 2 survivors, Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa, set out across the mountains on December 12. Using only materials found in the aircraft wreck, they climbed 839 meters from the crash site, up to 30 to 60 degree slopes to a 4,500-meter ridge to the west of the summit. From there, they trekked 59 kilometers for 10 days into Chile before finding help. On December 23rd and 22nd of 72, 2.5 months after the crash, the 14 remaining survivors were rescued. Their survival made worldwide news and inspired the movie Alive. Number 12. Philip Ashton, Roatan Island. Philip Ashton was a castaway on then uninhabited Roatan Island in the Gulf of Honduras for 16 months in 1723 and 4. His memoirs about his solitary stay were published in a book form in Boston in 1725. And while some people believed it was a novel in the style of Robinson Crusoe, Ashton's book was the account of a genuine experience. He was born in Marblehead, Massachusetts in 1702 and married twice. In June 1722, Ashton was captured by pirates while fishing near the coast of Shelburne, Nova Scotia. In the Boston Newsletter of July 9, 1722, Ashton was listed as being one of those captured by the pirate Edward Lowe. As Ashton refused to cooperate with the pirates, he was often threatened, especially by Lowe's quartermaster John Russell. He managed to escape in March in 1723 when the pirates landed at Roatan Island in the Bay Islands of Honduras, hiding in the jungle until the pirates decided to depart. He survived for 16 months in spite of many insects, tropical heat, and alligators. And in the beginning, he seems to have eaten only fruit because he only had his hands to collect food and couldn't kill any animal. He had no equipment at all until he met another castaway, an Englishman. A few days later, the Englishman went out, but he never returned. The Englishman, though, did leave behind a knife, gunpowder, tobacco, and more. Ashton could then kill tortoises and crayfish and make fires to have hot meals. Ashton was finally rescued by the Diamond, a ship from Salem, Massachusetts, and in 1725 Ashton's memorial, a short recollection of his adventures, was published with the help of his minister. Daniel Defoe is believed to have incorporated elements of Ashton's story into his 1726 novel, The 4-Year Voyage of Captain George Roberts. Number 11. The Lone Woman of San Nicolas Island. Juana Maria, better known to history as the Lone Woman of San Nicolas Island, was a native Californian woman who was the last surviving member of her tribe. She lived alone on San Nicolas Island off the coast of Alta California from 1835 until her removal from the island in 1853. Scott Odell's award-winning children's novel Island of the Blue Dolphins was inspired by her story. She was the last native speaker of the Nicoleño language. In 1814, a party of native Alaskan otter hunters working for the Russian-American Company, who massacred most of the islanders after accusing them of killing a native Alaskan hunter. In late November 1835, a schooner commanded by Charles Hubbard left Southern California to remove the remaining people living on the island. Well, upon arriving there, Hubbard's party gathered the islanders on the beach and brought them aboard. Juana Maria, however, was not among them. A strong storm arose, and the ship's crew, realizing the imminent danger of being wrecked by the surf and rocks, panicked and sailed towards the mainland, leaving her behind. A more romantic version tells of Juana Maria diving overboard after realizing her younger brother had been left behind. There are differing accounts as to the discovery of the lone woman, and the first was that Father Jose Gonzalez Rubio of the Santa Barbara Mission offered a man named Carl Dittman $100 to find her. The second, and what appears to be the original account, states that Father Jose paid one Thomas Jeffries $200 to find Juana Maria, although he was unsuccessful. However, the tales Jeffries told upon returning managed to capture imaginations. A Santa Barbara fur trapper who launched several expeditions of his own. His first 2 attempts failed to find her, but on his third, in the autumn of 1853, one of his men, Carl Dittman, discovered human footprints on the beach and pieces of seal blubber which had been left out to dry. Further investigation led to the discovery of Juana Maria, who was living on the island in a crude hut, partially constructed of whale bones. She was dressed in a skirt made of greenish cormorant feathers, and it was believed that she also lived in a cave nearby. Number 10. The real-life Lord of the Flies. The Tongan castaways were a group of 6 Tongan teenage boys who shipwrecked on the uninhabited island of Ata in 1965 and lived there for 15 months until their rescue. The boys ran away from their boarding school on the island of Tongatapu, stealing a boat in their escape. After a storm wrecked that boat, they drifted to the abandoned remote island of Ata and managed to keep themselves in good order during the duration under the circumstances. Long thought dead, they were discovered and rescued in September 1966 by Australian lobster fisher Peter Warner. In June 1965, the boys ran away from St. Andrew's Anglican boarding school. They had stolen a 24-foot boat on short notice and with little preparation. After they anchored for the night, the storm broke their anchor rope. The boat's sail and rudder were quickly destroyed by the wild winds, and over the next 8 days they drifted almost 320 kilometers, generally southwest, bailing water from their disintegrating boat until they sighted the island. At that point, they abandoned their ship and swam to the shore over the next 36 hours. After escaping the sea, the boys dug a cave by hand and hunted seabirds for meat, blood, and eggs. And initially they were desperate for food and water, but their situation improved after 3 months when they discovered the ruins of the village of Kolomali, an island's volcanic crater, following a 2-day climb. They revived the remnants of 19th century habitation, surviving on feral chickens, wild taro, and bananas. They captured rainwater for drinking and hollowed out tree trunks. They drank blood from seabirds when they didn't have enough water, and the boys divided up the labor, teaming in pairs to work in the garden, kitchen, and guard duty. One of the boys, Stephen, who would go on to become an engineer, managed to use 2 sticks to start a fire, which the boys kept burning continuously for more than a year while marooned. On the 11th of September 1966, the Australian fishing boat Just David, captained by Peter Warner, approached the island. Warner noticed patches of burned grass on the island's cliffsides. After spotting the unkempt, naked boys through binoculars, Just David approached cautiously, as Warner had been told that serious criminals were sometimes marooned there. When the ship was close enough, Stephen dived in and swam to the boat, explaining himself in English. And after an enormous celebration, the group was hired by Warner to crew a lobster boat. Number 9. Tim Shattuck and his dog Bella. Tim Shattuck used to spend his days working for a large tech company. Quote, "I was a very different man, wearing a big suit and tie, and it was not right for me. I realized I needed to change my life." End quote. Well, so one day he took his computer and went into the depths of nature, in the mountains and to remote places in Asia. Then he turned to the sea, a sea that would come close to ending his life. In 2020, his path led to Mexico, where he decided to sail from La Paz, in the state of Baja California Sur, to French Polynesia. Nearly 1,200 miles away from land and without communication, a storm tore off his sail, killed his engine, and left him adrift in the wildest part of the Pacific. A tuna boat found him on July 12th and rescued him, along with his dog Bella. The Australian prepared some provisions before starting the trip, some rice, cans of tuna, and some other preserves that would not need refrigeration. On the boat, he tried to alternate that food with fishing, and when there was no catch, he resorted to cans. Shattuck hunted and fished in a variety of ways. On July 7th, Hurricane Calvin began to form. On July 12th, about 125 miles off the coast of Colima, Shattuck was still adrift and close to the hurricane, which could have been fatal. He was lucky. A helicopter that was flying over the area in search of dark spots made by schools of fish in the sea saw the small white boat and notified the tuna vessel. Then a small boat from the ship approached the Aloha Toa. "I think I'll sail in the future, probably on a much bigger boat," he said. "Maybe a cruise ship, just sit in my lounge, eat my food, air conditioning, and a big screen TV." Number 8. The Donner Party, the Sierra Nevada mountain range. The Donner Party were a group of American pioneers who migrated to California in a wagon train from the Midwest. Delayed by a multitude of mishaps, they spent the winter of 1846 and 1847 snowbound in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Some of the migrants resorted to cannibalism to survive, primarily eating the bodies of those who had succumbed to starvation. Now, the Donner Party originated from Springfield, Illinois, and departed Independence, Missouri, on the Oregon Trail in the spring of 1846, behind many other pioneer families who were attempting to make the same trip. The journey west usually took between 4 and 6 months, but the Donner Party was slowed after electing to follow a new route called the Hastings Cutoff, which bypassed established trails and instead crossed the Rocky Mountains. The desolate and rugged terrain and the difficulties they later encountered while traveling along the Humboldt River in present-day Nevada resulted in the loss of cattle and wagons, and divisions soon formed within the group. By early November, the migrants had reached the Sierra Nevada but became trapped by an early heavy snowfall near Trucklee Lake, now Donner Lake, high in the mountains. Their food supplies ran dangerously low, and in mid-September, some of the group set out on foot to obtain help. Rescuers from California attempted to reach the migrants, but the first relief party didn't arrive until the middle of February 1847, almost 4 months after the wagon train became trapped. Of the 87 members of the party, 48 survived. Historians have described this episode as one of the most fascinating tragedies in California history and the entire record of American westward migration. Moving on to number 7, Oguri Jukuchi, 484 days at sea. Oguri Jukuchi was one of the first Japanese citizens known to have reached present-day California. He and his 14-man crew, bound for Edo, were sailing off the Japanese coast in 1813 when their ship, the Tokujomaru, was disabled in a storm. The ship drifted across the Pacific, reaching the vicinity of Santa Barbara on the coast of Alta California, then part of New Spain in late March 1815. Oguri and 2 surviving crew members were rescued at sea by the Big Forester under Captain William J. Piggott. According to the brig's sailing master, Alexander Adams, a ship in distress was spotted on March 24, 1815, which proved to be Japanese and had lost both mast and rudder. Captain Piggott sent Adams to Tokujomaru, where he found 3 survivors and brought them to Forester. Details about the rescue differ in the accounts written by Adams, Piggott, and others, such as the Russian naval officer Otto von Kutzbe, in part due to language difficulties. Piggott said that the original crew of the ship was 14 or 17, but Adams and Kotzebue said it was 35. 14 corpses were found in the hold of the crew of the Forester. The reported time adrift varied between 13 to 18 months. The exact location of the rescue varied between reports as well, but it seemed to have been up to 300 miles west-southwest of Point Conception. Forester, although flying a British flag, was an American vessel owned by John Jacob Astor, intended to support Astor's Pacific Fur Company. Its original purpose lost, Captain Piggott used Forester for the maritime fur trade, in partial cooperation with the Russian-American company, which was hunting sea otters off the coast of California. Thus, the rescued Japanese sailors were first taken to Bodega Bay near Fort Ross, then to Sitka. A Russian ship took the Japanese survivors back to Japan. Number 6. Aaron Lee Ralston's survival in Blue John Canyon. Aaron Lee Ralston, an American mountaineer, mechanical engineer, and motivational speaker, became widely known for his harrowing experience in Blue John Canyon in southeastern Utah. On April 26, 2003, while solo canyoneering, Ralston accidentally dislodged a boulder that crushed and pinned his right wrist against the canyon wall. Trapped and isolated, Ralston had not formed any one of his hiking plans, nor did he have the means to call for help. Over the next 5 days, he faced the grim reality of his situation. With limited supplies of water and 2 burritos, he tried unsuccessfully to free himself. After 3 days, a severely dehydrated and delirious Ralston decided to amputate his trapped arm. He realized he could break his radius and ulna using torque, and using a dull pocket knife and pliers from his multi-tool, he completed the amputation, which took about an hour, using tubing from his camelback as a makeshift tourniquet. Following the amputation, Ralston navigated through the rest of the canyon, rappelled a 65-foot drop, and hiked 7 miles to safety. His ordeal was later detailed in his autobiography, Between a Rock and a Hard Place, and a depiction in the 2010 film 127 Hours, where James Franco portrayed him. 6 months after the incident, Ralston returned to the canyon with Tom Brokaw and an NBC camera crew to film a special for Dateline NBC on his 28th birthday, where he scattered the ashes of his amputated arm, stating, "They belonged here." Number 5. Stephen Callahan, lost at sea for 76 days. Stephen Callahan is an American author, naval architect, inventor, and sailor. In 1981, he survived 76 days adrift on the Atlantic Ocean in a life raft. He detailed his ordeal in the best-selling book, Adrift: 76 Days Lost at Sea, which remained on the New York Times bestseller list for over 36 weeks. Callahan departed from Newport, Rhode Island in 1981 on the Napoleon Solo, a 6.5-meter sloop he designed and built. After sailing to Bermuda alone, he continued to England with his friend Chris Lasham. 7 days into the journey, a night storm caused an unknown object to hole his vessel, swamping it. The boat didn't sink outright due to its watertight compartments, but Callahan suspected the damage was caused by a whale collision. Unable to stay aboard as the lifeboat filled with water, Callahan escaped into the 6-man Avon inflatable life raft. He managed to retrieve essential items including a cushion, sleeping bag, emergency kit with food, navigation charts, a spear gun, flares, a torch, and solar stills for water, plus a survival manual by Dougal Robertson. A large wave eventually separated Callahan from the Napoleon Solo, leaving him adrift. Callahan survived by catching fish, primarily mahi-mahi and triggerfish, along with flying fish, barnacles, and birds. He collected drinking water from solar stills and makeshift rainwater devices, averaging just over a pint per day. On April 20th, 1982, Callahan spotted lights on the Marie Galante Island, southeast of Guadalupe. The next day, after 76 days adrift, fishermen drawn by birds hovering over his raft rescued him. Number 4. Marguerite de la Roque, marooned. Marguerite de la Roque, a French noblewoman, became famous for surviving several years, marooned on Île de Dimon during her voyage to New France. Her story has been recounted since 1560. In 1541, her relative Jean-François de la Roque de Roberval was appointed Lieutenant General of New France and set out for the New World the following year, with Marguerite accompanying him. During the journey, Marguerite began a romance with a young man. Outraged, Roberval abandoned Marguerite, along with her lover and maidservant Damiens, on the Isle of Demons. While his strict Calvinist morals might have played a role, it's believed financial greed was a significant motive, as Roberval stood to benefit from her death due to his high debts. Marooned on the island, Marguerite gave birth to a child who tragically died, as did her lover and Damiens. The child's death was likely due to insufficient milk, given Marguerite's poor diet. Marguerite survived by hunting wild animals and was eventually rescued by Basque fishermen. The Island of Demons is believed to have been named after Marguerite, with demoiselle meaning young lady in French. Her remarkable tale of endurance and survival remains a captivating historical narrative. Number 3. The Ross Sea Party, a tale of survival. The Ross Sea Party was an integral component of Sir Ernest Shackleton's 1914-17 Imperial Transantarctic expedition. Their mission was to establish a series of supply depots across the Great Ice Barrier from the Ross Sea to the Beardmore Glacier, supporting Shackleton's main party, which intended to march across Antarctica from the Weddell Sea via the South Pole. Shackleton's main party, aboard the ship Endurance, set sail from London in August 1914, bound for the Weddell Sea. Meanwhile, the Ross Sea Party faced disaster early on. Their ship, Aurora, became trapped in an ice floe and was torn from its moorings, drifted away with ocean currents for over 6 months. Eventually, the Aurora broke free, but with a damaged rudder, had to return to New Zealand, leaving the shore party marooned. Despite severe setbacks, including interpersonal disputes, extreme weather, illness, and the deaths of 3 members, the Ross Sea Party completed their mission. They laid the crucial supply depots that Shackleton's team would need if they reached that point. The stranded party endured until January 1917, when the repaired and refitted Aurora returned from New Zealand to rescue them. Public recognition for the Ross Sea Party's efforts was slow, but eventually 4 Albert Medals were awarded to its members, 2 of them posthumously. Their story stands as an example of human endurance and the spirit of exploration. Number 2. Sergei Krikalev, stranded on Mir during the Soviet collapse. Sergei Krikalev, a Russian mechanical engineer and former cosmonaut, faced an unprecedented situation when he became stranded aboard the Mir space station during the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Initially scheduled for a shorter mission, Krikalev ended up spending 311 consecutive days in space, twice the original mission duration, as geopolitical changes delayed his return. In early 1988, Krikalev began training for his first long-duration flight on Mir, which included preparations for spacewalks, module installations, and joint Soviet-French missions. He was in space on December 26, 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved, leaving his mission in uncertainty since the Baikonur Cosmodrome and landing area was now part of independent Kazakhstan. Due to the extended mission, Krikalev experienced time dilation, making him 0.02 seconds younger than his peers upon return to Earth on March 25, 1992. Often referred to as the last Soviet citizen, Krikalev's ordeal is documented in Andrei Yujika's 1995 documentary Out of the Present and inspired the 2017 film Sergio and Sergei. During his time on Mir, Krikalev communicated with amateur radio operators worldwide, forming a notable connection with Margaret Laquinto, They spoke daily for a year, marking the first successful communication via packet radio between an orbiting space station and an amateur operator. La Quinto provided Krikalev and his crew with uncensored news about the collapsing Soviet Union, maintaining a vital link to the changing world below. Number 1. Hiro Onoda. Hiro Onoda was a Japanese intelligence officer in the Imperial Japanese Army who continued to fight in World War II long after it ended. Following the war's conclusion in August of 1945, Onoda spent 29 years hiding in the Philippines, unaware that the conflict had ceased. Born in 1922, Onoda enlisted in the Imperial Japanese Army Infantry at the age of 20. On December 26, 1944, he was deployed to Lubang Island in the Philippines, with orders to sabotage enemy attacks by destroying the airstrip and harbor pier. His orders explicitly stated that he should neither surrender nor take his own life. Upon arriving, Onoda joined a group of Japanese soldiers on the island. The senior officers prevented him from executing his mission, which facilitated the United States and Philippine Commonwealth Forces' capture of the island on February 28, 1945. Soon after, all but Onoda and 3 other soldiers had either perished or surrendered. Onoda, now a lieutenant, led his remaining men into the hills where they continued guerrilla warfare and had several skirmishes with local police. Throughout his time in hiding, Onoda and his companions allegedly killed up to 30 Filipino civilians. Despite leaflets being dropped in late 1945 declaring the war's end, Onoda's group dismissed them as enemy propaganda. Over the years, his companions either died or surrendered, leaving Onoda alone. On February 20, 1974, Onoda was finally discovered by Norio Suzuki, a Japanese explorer traveling the world. Suzuki informed Onoda that the war had ended and that the emperor wanted him to return home. This message convinced Onoda to surrender, bringing his decades-long war to a close. Onoda's extraordinary story of survival and loyalty is documented in various accounts, highlighting his unwavering dedication to his orders. His eventual return to Japan marked the end of one of the longest World War II survival stories. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.